three major contributions from Āryabhaṭīya, and that becomes the prelude to the next speaker, whom we have here. Professor, yes. Yeah. So here is a short introduction to sir. He is a chairman, Center for Policy Studies. He is a PhD from University of Rochester, and he's been delivering research in Indian tradition of sciences and technologies, drawing upon civilizational resources, and is also declared as a fellow of the Indian National Science Academy. The topic is written here, and all of us are eagerly waiting, sir.
Namaskar to all of you. I'm very grateful to the organizers for holding such a important and interesting meeting on a topic that's not much discussed, the Purāṇic and Siddhāntic cosmology. When I was asked to come and attend this and speak, I expressed my apprehension because I have studied a little bit of Siddhāntic astronomy, but I have not looked into this subject at all. So I said I will be a listener. And suddenly when they later on sent me a program, they put a slot for me to speak something. And so I thought I will have to say something in the end, so this is why you see me here speaking. The relation between Siddhāntic and Purāṇic cosmology, why are we studying this at all? Because there has been a historical narrative on that there seems to be some discord between the two, some divergence between the two. If there were a single cosmological tradition, then the issue, we will not be calling one Purāṇic and one Siddhāntic cosmology. And our understanding of the divergence, meaning the Indians of the present generation, comes more from what we have analyzed on this subject, both within the country and in the international scholarship in the last 2 centuries. So we are also a product of what has been told to us on this. So we will have to factor it in our discussion, because that's what comes up all the time. But of course, we'll have to go back and look at our own books and study it from our own perspective. When we integrate science and spirituality, there is Indian science, there is Indian spirituality, they can be integrated. But they are both universal also. Indian science is not just for Indians to practice, and Indian spirituality is not alone for Indians to follow. Similarly, there will be other traditions of science, other traditions of spirituality. So I'll say something about the modern debate, just to indicate the kind of discussion that's going on amongst the Western Indological scholarship. I'll say something about how Indians discuss this, and so I will have to mainly concentrate upon what is the philosophical basis with which our Siddhāntic astronomers looked into this question, the cosmology that has been discussed in Purāṇas. So the Siddhāntic astronomers I will be considering is starting from Āryabhaṭīya up to Nīlakaṇṭha Somayājī in 15th, 16th century. Of course, Siddhāntic astronomy is perhaps quite older than Āryabhaṭīya, as Sriram said yesterday. It could at least be 200, 300 years older, because when Āryabhaṭīya is presenting it, it's coming in almost a complete form. It's not Āryabhaṭīya, if he had introduced the sine function in 499, all those relations involving all those astronomical quantities in terms of sines and cosines and those formulae, etc., couldn't have been discovered by him. So, and there are many more in Varahamihira, and which is also perhaps almost contemporary, about 30, 40 years later. So this would have been an older tradition, even if it's all borrowed from the Greeks, that the Greek diagrams to be converted to Indian science and Indian formulae will take much more time. It took maybe Arabs about 400 years to do these kinds of things later, 700 years later. But the available text, which is authentically Siddhāntic, whose time has been established and whose textuality has been established. The oldest one is Āryabhaṭīya. So we will start from that and come up to. Okay. It's moving now. Okay, so the early 19th century view on Indian cosmology is one that we are all familiar with, what Macaulay wrote in his minutes, where he said that astronomy, which would move laughter in girls at English boarding school, geography made of seas of treacle and seas of butter. But Macaulay was not the only person who was talking about Indian astronomical tradition. At that time, there was Lancelot Wilkinson, who was the British agent near Bhopal at Sehore. And he had expressed a slightly different view. He wrote an article called On the Use of Siddhantas in the Work of Native Education. So according to Wilkinson, the people whom he saw were of three classes: Jains, the followers of Brahminical or Purāṇical system, and the Jyotishis or followers of the Siddhāntas. And he said the Jains have some strange ideas. They maintain that Earth is flat, plane of immense extent. Earth now is and has been falling downwards in space. This, I think, more a Buddhist theory. That there are two suns, two moons, and two sets of corresponding planets and constellations. The moon, they believe, is to be above the sun. And the followers of Purāṇas believe in a system very little different from that of the Jains. They also maintain that the Earth is a circular plane, having the golden mountain Meru in the center, that is 50 crores of yojanas in superficial diameter. The Jambudvipa, immediately surrounding Meru and which we inhabit, is 1 lakh yojanas in width. That this Dvipa is surrounded by a sea of salt water, also 1 lakh of yojanas width, etc. The Purāṇas assert that the Earth is not falling in space, but is supported by Shesha. Purāṇas maintain that there is but one moon and one sun, but the moon, however, is at a distance from the Earth which is double that of the sun, that the sun and the moon and the constellations resolve horizontally over the plane of the Earth, appearing to set when they go behind Meru and to rise when they emerge from behind that mountain. That the eclipses are formed by the monsters Rahu and Ketu laying hold of sun or moon. The followers of Purāṇas are by far the most numerous of the three classes. Final are the astronomers. The Siddhantas believe in a system widely differing from both the above. That system is, with exception of few inconsiderable differences, that of Ptolemy. The authors of Siddhantas, especially Bhaskaracharya, the author of Siddhanta Shiromani, has spared no pains to expose and ridicule the monstrous absurdities of the Jain Sutras and the Purāṇas. They have always professed in their writings the greatest admiration for the learned men of the West, the Ionians or the Yavanas. This based upon just one verse that Rahamihira wrote in Brihad Samhita, Yavanastu, Mlechahi Yavanas Tesham, Samyak Shastramidam Sthitam, Rishivatvepi Pujyante, Kim Punah Brahmanaha Dvijaha. Anyway, Wilkinson, again it's not moving. Give to me, I will move it there from here only. Oh, it has come now. Okay. So it's taking some time. Wilkinson also explained why he is wanting to introduce the Indian astronomical Siddhantas in native education. The debate at that time, 1834-35, was on how to introduce a new system of education in India. And the main thing he was saying, it's moving backward or forward. But I feel assured from experience. No, you may ask me that why are you talking about these Siddhantas? Colebrook, Bentley, Davis have all analyzed them. What is it going to tell us newly about astronomy? What is contained in these Siddhantas? The answer is that I feel assured from experience that they afford us beyond all comparison the best means of promoting the cause of education, civilization, and truth. I mean, all these three are very loaded terms. You will have to understand what they mean amongst our Hindu subjects. So he was very plain about what he wanted to do. And then people said, but even if you want to teach them the truth of the gospel, he meant, or of modern science, Why go back 1,000 years in search of truth, avowedly containing some admixture of error, when the pure and unadulterated truth is at hand? To them, I reply that that kind of unadulterated truth cannot be easily communicated to the Indians. They believe more in the authority of their Siddhantas. So it is through the Siddhantas that we have to convey to them modern knowledge, modern truth. Of course, it's another story. This was what was called the Orientalist plan of education as opposed to the Anglicist plan of education that Macaulay propagated. It's another story that this strategy was not accepted by the administrators when the policy to introduce a new system of education came in 1835. Anyway, so now much water has flown since then. There has been some recent interest in the Purāṇic cosmology and Siddhāntic cosmology. A recent trend started with an article of David Pingree, one of the important modern historians of science. And he tried to explain that, of course, he holds the view that both Purāṇic and the Jyotiḥśā cosmologies owe their origin to Babylonian and Greek ideas. This is one of Pingree's favorite ideas. And after explaining that, he will explain the Vaitamaha Siddhanta, the key Jyotiḥśā text, which contains both the ideas, the basic ideas of Siddhāntic astronomy. Then he has also argued that a movement to reconcile the cosmology of the astronomers with that of the Purāṇas began in the 17th century, perhaps in an attempt among Indian intellectuals to close the ranks against the perceived threat to their traditions posed by Islamic and European astronomy, that a new class of texts arose in India in 16th, 17th century, where people tried to again justify what is said in Purāṇas and also base it on the astronomical texts also. This was taken forward by Minkowski, who looked actually at many of those texts written in 16th and 17th and 18th century, which were of interest to him. And these are the main points Minkowski is making. The cosmological account found in Sanskrit astronomical Siddhantas was in fundamental respects not reconcilable with the Purāṇic model of the earth and the heavens. And it was Lallacharya in the early 9th century who formulated what we now call the standard view of the problem. And that was repeated by all influential Siddhantas of Sripati and Bhaskara in 11th and 12th century, which rejected those parts of Purāṇic model that contradicted any of the aspects of the Siddhāntic model that were employed in their calculations. At the same time, Lalla sought to accommodate his cosmology to Purāṇic doctrines where they did not interfere with the astronomical calculations. I will explain some of this later, what all this means. Then Minkowski found one author from Parthapura. This is in the Godavari banks in Maharashtra. This Parthapura school was founded by one Jñānarāja with a text called Siddhāntasundara in 1503. And this and his son's commentary and his another son's explanation, they display a greater concern for the authority of the Vedas and more so to the Purāṇas, and initiated a movement to revise the interpretation of the Purāṇic statements or reconcile them in other ways with the Siddhāntic picture. So, Lallacharya first said that we will remove from our discussion most aspects of Purāṇic model that contradict Siddhāntic astronomy and retain some of the others, according to Minkowski. And again, Minkowski is saying that these people in 16th century started a movement to take a relook at Purāṇas, reinterpret those statements, or find other ways to make them become consistent with the Siddhāntic picture. So in this work of Suryadasa, the son of Jñānarāja, Suryadasa is better known today as an author of a commentary on Bijagadita of Bhaskara. So this Jyotiḥśāstra Purāṇa Virodha Parihara is one of the sections. And this Virodha Parihara became a topic of discussion. In 17th century, there were from Deccan a great migration of astronomers, mostly from Maharashtra and Gujarat, to Varanasi. There were two main families, one coming from Golagrama one coming from Dhadigrama. And Nrisimhadevagya and Munishwara are descendants of the two. Both of them have commented on Bhaskaracharya's Siddhanta Shiromani. They looked at Jñānarāja and the works of Parthapura school. They discussed it and they more or less rejected most of the things that were said by them. But in 17th, later half of 17th and much of 18th century, a host of other scholars, Nīlakaṇṭha Chaturdhara, Keval Rama, Shankara Mallimaya, Āryabhaṭīya and others, more are mentioned in Minkowski's article, who took this Virodha Parihara issue seriously. But most of these authors were really not specialists in Siddhāntic astronomy. And in 19th century, after the British started to introduce the Copernican system, there was again quite a bit of writing. And there was one Subba Bapuji in Maharashtra who wrote a Siddhanta Shiromani Prakasha. He was a protege of Wilkinson. Then there were other scholars. One Yageshwara wrote an Avirodha Prakasha against that, and Bapuji again retorted. So this debate of Avirodha continued in 19th century, taking into account modern astronomical theories also. Now, according to Minkowski, there can be no doubt that Indian astronomers in every period felt pressure in varying degrees to make their science acceptable to doctrines found in the Purāṇas and in other religious literature. In the early modern period, this pressure appears to have significantly increased. The appeal to layers of truth, that is, something like Vyavaharika Satya, Paramarthika Satya kind of thing, mode of accounting for intellectual difference turns up in many of our authors of this period in more or less limited roles. It could be explained as a failure of Indian knowledge systems to adapt by hampering the ability of them to attend to the new scientific models that might have become available to them, either from the Islamic tradition or from the European tradition. Now, this work of Pingree, the 19th century work, was summarized by a man called Robert Fox Young, and the work of Minkowski has been summarized by Kim Plofker, who is more well known to Indian scholars of history of science, in an article called Derivation and Revelation, the Legitimacy of Mathematical Models in Indian Cosmology. Her main contention is that this legitimacy was undermined by what she calls as the epistemological labyrinth to which Siddhantic astronomers had descended. So how does she characterize this epistemological labyrinth? So main point she's making is the following. It turns out that instead of simply defying the revealed truth for the honor of mathematical consistency, Siddhanta authors were often trying to have the best of both the worlds, relying on their measurable and calculable universe while still availing themselves at the need of Purāṇic authority. This was already indicated in the early inspiration of using features of Purāṇic universe to fill in the gaps, literally and figuratively, in the geography or mechanics of Siddhantic. This is reference to Lalla. The mathematical models that Indian astronomy inherited and defined were legitimated by a wealth of different criteria that must have seemed startlingly incongruous to a 19th century Englishman, as indeed they had also done to a 11th century Muslim. The reference is to Al-Biruni. The validity of these models was variously claimed by the text to be confirmed not only by internal consistency and agreement with observed phenomena, this is how science should be according to her, but by numerical elegance and symmetry, argument, agreement with cosmological premises and sacred texts, conformity to earlier Siddhantas which might be considered on par with sacred texts themselves, and the ultimate argument, some Latin word here, ascription to direct divine authorship. So this has been the kind of debate which is going on. I am not calling upon all of us to participate in this, but we should be aware of the kind of scholarship that is going to come. Many more of these texts will be sort of unearthed and edited and published, and more contradictions and more problems in Indian approach to science will be sort of explained. So what was the Indian approach to science? So for that we have to know Indian epistemology. So basically, the theory of knowledge is founded on the theory of Purāṇas, which is common to all schools of philosophy. Charvakas, who are often hailed mostly by Indian leftists as scientific materialists, they are the skeptics who recognize only perception or observation as the valid means of knowledge. Various schools of Buddhism and Vaisheshikas recognize anumana or inference also as a means of knowledge. The Jaina, Sankhya, Yoga, and some schools of Vedanta, such as Vishishtadvaita or Dvaita, recognize authoritative texts or authoritative statements of scholars, Shabda or Agama, verbal testimony of a reliable person, also as a valid means of knowledge. But Bauddhas and Vaisheshikas also recognize this, but they take it as a part of Anumana itself. The Nyaya school, which is well known as the main school of epistemology in Indian philosophy, this has Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, and Shabda. And some schools of Vedanta and Purva Mimamsa also have Arthapati and Anupalabdhi. Okay. But mostly, as concerns us, Pratyaksha, Anumana, and Agama are the three sources of valid knowledge. But what is very crucial about Indian epistemology, one is a very detailed analysis of Shabda or Agama as a source of valid knowledge. We normally only say what is reasonable or what is observed, and not what is authoritatively stated, because saying something is authoritatively stated is almost considered opposite of scientific temper, which is supposed to question everything. Most of science is accepting what is given in authoritative text, questioning some small part of it and adding something to it. So this detailed analysis of Shabda Pramana, the important role of authoritative text is what Indian epistemologists have done in great detail. Anyway, but there is a hierarchy amongst the Pramanas in Indian tradition, that this reason cannot contradict Pratyaksha or Agama, and this is there in the first basic text of Nyaya Shastra, the commentary of Vatsyayana on Nyaya Sutra. Basically, yat punar anumanam pratyaksha agama viruddham saha Āryabhaṭīya. So, an anumana which is opposite to what is seen or what is in text is generally Āryabhaṭīya. Of course, if you think that there is some problem with the text, you can think about it, but this is the general position. And this is generally practiced in Indian science. I am giving an example from Sushruta Samhita. Now, there is a lot of debate on its date. But anyway, generally most of Indian scholars believe this is prior to 300, 400, before the Common Era. So here is a verse which is talking about a medicine which is in the Ambashta group. Even if you give thousands of arguments, you cannot make them do the act of purgation, because the action of the Ambashta group of drugs is very well established both by experience and by traditional texts. And traditional texts are supposed to be based upon the detailed experience of generations. So this Pratyaksha Lakshana Phalaha Prasiddhāṣca Svabhavataha Naushadhihi Hetubhir Vidwan Pariksheta Katanchana. The drugs which are established by their direct action and which are also whose properties are very well known through tradition, one should not go on arguing about their effects. The next thing is that the Agama cannot contradict Pratyaksha. And this is said even in philosophical texts, like for instance in Vachaspati Mishra's commentary on Brahma Sutra Bhashya, Nahi Agamaha Sahasramati Ghatam Pataitum Ishate. That you cannot make a Ghata a Pata by quoting thousands of texts. And again in medical tradition also, this is very common. Shargadhara Samhita says that if you keep finding that a drug which is quoted to be belonging to some gana and is supposed to cure some disease in the text, but that is not curing, you should stop using it. And if you find a drug which is effective, you should include it into that gana. So now we can come to the main issue that I wanted to discuss. Already I have taken, I think, about 20 minutes of my time. So now we come to the issue. Now, Āryabhaṭīya was written in 499, and it's a very brief text. 32 verses describe the mathematics, then about 25 verses of Kala-kriya pada, which is the main portion which discusses. It is Kala-kriya, the kriya that you have to do to find Kala. The Jyotiḥśāstra itself is said to be Kala Vidhana Shastra. And so this time direction and place are to be found by observing the motion of the celestial bodies. So that's how astronomy becomes a science of kala, but analyzing the motion of celestial bodies. So I am looking at only those parts of our text which are talking something about those issues in cosmology where the cosmology of what they are stating and cosmology of what the Purāṇas or other traditional texts or other traditions are stating are supposedly in contradiction. So what do they say on that in texts of Siddhāntic astronomy? How do they argue about it? These are the kind of topics. This is what I will be dealing with. The Kalakriya Pada, first Āryabhaṭīya is giving two verses where he is saying that the earth is at the center of the universe, and then he is giving the sequence in which all these planets, 5 planets, then the moon and sun are seen, and the stars. And this verse obviously goes against what was said to be the Purāṇic or the traditional view that moon is above the sun. So without going into any argument, Āryabhaṭīya is just stating this. Bhana Madaha Shaneshchara Suraguru Bhauma Arka Shukra Buddha Chandraha Esha Madhascha Bhumi. So Bha means nakshatra, then the Saturn, then Suraguru Jupiter, then Mars, then Sun, then Venus, then Buddha, then Moon, then Earth. So this is the order of planets which have been accepted in India from the time of Āryabhaṭīya. And in Western astronomy, roughly from the Greek astronomy, roughly from the time of Ptolemy. It was different at the time of Plato and Aristotle. Now, how this is argued? This is the order in which they are located. Okay. So now, how is this argued? So the argument is given in the commentary of, we do not have an earlier commentary of Āryabhaṭīya. This is of 629 in Bhaskara Bhashya. So the arguments are very standard. They are given in any book. I will not be able to discuss these arguments, but you can just see the kind of argument I will indicate. Nanucha anye bruvati. So he is not talking of Purāṇas or any such thing. Others are taking like this. Sarvesham upari chandramasah kaksheti. So moon's orbit is above that of sun. Tadayuktam. Sarvesham grahanam adaha chandra kakshya ityaha. So yadi upari syat tada chandrasya graha nakshatra bhede sphuta kalanka harine graha nakshatra trada drishyaran. So if moon is quite above, then even the other planets crossing the moon, in occultation you will be seeing its effect. Surya vashat yad upari chandrasyat tada suryanārād vyavasthitena sada chandramasopi svasyārād bhagam akhandam drishyeta. So these phases will not be seen. Whole of moon will be seen most of the time. So because of this, we cannot take up this view. And now he says, Anye punaha sugata matavalambinaha. Now he is referring to the Jains. Initially he said Anye. Now he is saying sugata matavalambinaha. Surya chandramasoho ekam kakshyam achakshate. They say they are in the same orbit. So he is quoting a Jaina verse. Then naivam yujyate. Then he is giving again an argument that this will not be true. And the eclipses will not happen if this is so. So this is the kind of argument Bhaskara is giving, that this is contradicting known observation, or if this were true, other things will have to happen, which we do not see. And there is no further argument. He is not saying everything that the Jainas are saying is wrong or right or whatever. He is just taking this issue and giving his view on this. Similarly, in Gaudapada, Āryabhaṭīya is saying, Vritta bhapanjara madhye kaksha pariveshitaha kamadhyagataha mrijjalashiki vayumayo bhugolaha sarvato vritha. The earth is a sphere. Whereas one of the Purāṇic and other views is said to be earth is like a flat disk. So again they are arguing kamadhyangata, etc. And first he is trying to argue that the bhumadhya sthitaha, because there is this view that earth is falling in some of the older texts. And the other question, the question arises, if everything falls on the earth, why is earth itself not falling? So for that, various arguments are given. Bhuhu dharanatmika, da dharyamanatmika. Earth is what which holds. It is not held by anything else. And if it starts falling down, what is meant by down? down and up are relative to the surface of earth only. Then again he comes to the other kind of article which you would have seen in Bhaskara. Some people say that Shesha is holding the earth. Even that is not all right. Because if Shesha has to hold the earth, then who holds the Shesha? And so there will be what is called anavastha, or infinite regress. That for each thing which holds the other, something else has to hold it. So these are the kind of arguments. And again, he is again giving other arguments to show why the earth should be a sphere. So this is the way it is argued in one of the oldest Siddhāntic astronomy texts and its commentary. And this is Āryabhaṭā's words. Yadvat kadamba pushpa granthi prachitaha samantataha kusumahi, like a kadamba pushpa. This is how the earth is a sphere. Then somewhere in another issue, Bhaskara Bhashya is quoting this verse, which is perhaps, he is not saying whose verse it is. This is similar to the verse that Varahamihira quotes, that the Ayanas were in the Ashlesha and Dhanishta. And then he says that that is not so. This statement of Shruti smrityoho punah bhede yacha smriti pratyaksha aviruddha sa parigrihyate. And so we have to accept what is currently seen. And what is currently seen is Karkatadav and Makaradav. So the Ayana happens in Karkata and Makara and not in Shravishta, Ashlesha and Dhanishta, which is what is given in Vedanga Jyotisha and what is cited by Varahamihira also. So basically the point he is expressing the importance of Pratyaksha above the given text. Of course, there can be further argument. At that time it was true. Therefore, there is a movement of Ayana and all that. He is not going into that. He is going into that and rejecting the movement of Ayana, but that is his view. Then another thing, whenever there are complicated issues about the theoretical model that you are taking, what is the kind of justifications Indian give? Wherever justifications can be given, they give justifications. So here is one question. So this Bhaganas of the moon's Ucha is given in Āryabhaṭīya. So he says, Sheshyuchadeyo naiva lakṣyante, tesham katham bhaganaha bhavanti. The apogee of moon is not seen, it's not a physical body. So how does one write its revolution numbers, etc.? So now he sort of uses that to say that this is only a theoretical model, this is a hypothesis that is being made, and such hypotheses are made in all subjects. In the Vyakarana Shastra, Prakriti Pratyaya Lopa Agama Varna Vikaradibihi Upayahi Sadhu Shabda Asadhyate Yevam Atrapi, just as in the science of Vyakarana, you have all these theoretical concepts through which you derive all the valid words. And he quotes Bhartrhari's very famous statement, so this planetary model that we are talking about is a upaya. It is a means of arriving or calculating the motion of planets. Every aspect of it cannot be immediately ascribed to an element of reality. There may be many aspects of it which we can do, many aspects which we may not be able to do. And later in Bhaskara Bhashya and Kalatriyapada, he again explains the same point in much greater detail. Uccha Nicha Madhyama Paridhiyo Evamadi Sputagati Sadhanopaya Bhutanancha Upayanam Naiva Niyamo Uktirva Vidyate. Niyama means there is nothing unique about them. There is no limitation that you can make on a model that you are making to explain a set of phenomena, except that it should explain the given set of phenomena. That is the only requirement. So these are very forcefully said about 2-3 times in this text. Then there is this Someshwara Bhashya, because Bhaskara Bhashya stops in beginning of Gaudapada somewhere. For the later issues, they have published it with the Someshwara Bhashya, but Someshwara says in the end of his Bhashya that he is actually summarizing Acharya Āryabhaṭa. He said Bhaskara, somewhere it comes, Bhaskarot, I cannot read it from here. The Bhaskara's commentary I am summarizing. And so when this Meru Yojana Matraha Prabhakaro Himavatam Parikshiptaha, Āryabhaṭa says Meru is only 1 yojana, whereas in Purāṇas Meru is 84,000 yojana. Āryabhaṭa doesn't give any argument. Now Someshwara is saying, Ata Purāṇikahi, since Someshwara is around 1100, he is using the word Purāṇika. This doesn't occur in Bhaskara Bhashya, for instance. Lakshayojana pramano meruhu patyate tad yukti rahitam. Ata bhureva mahapramana parikalpyate tad ayuktam. Yat sapanchashat sahasram yojananam bhyuvasa mana akshonnati prasadhitam tat sa upapattikam. For that, grahodaya astamaya madhyana chaya avanati lambanadibihi siddham utsrijya kim anyat upalabhyate. What we have calculated and observed about the rising and setting of planets, the shadows, all these are calculated with the dimension of the earth as 5,000 yojanas as given in the Āryabhaṭa school, or 3,500 in one school and another. And so there is no need. Whatever these are given, these are ayuktam. And Āryabhaṭa just says that the chadaka, the one which causes eclipses, it is Earth's shadow and the moon for the lunar eclipse and solar eclipse respectively. There is no argument on that. This is just stated. And in the end, Āryabhaṭa says in his book that all this have to be examined, and the way of examination is by observing the planets and the sun and the moon in various conjunction in various times. Kshiti Ravi Yogat Dinakrit, Ravindu Yogat Prasaditaha Cha Induhu, Shashi Taragraha Yogat Tatheva, Taragraha Sarve. All this have to be calculated. Again, not moving. Sir. Panchasiddhantika is a text which was written about 400 years. That also again talking about similar issues. It doesn't have a commentary, unfortunately. For other works of Varahamihira, we have wonderful commentaries of Bhattotpala. If that were available for this text, lot of debates on ancient Indian astronomy would have been very easily settled by now. And on the cause of eclipses, on the sequence of planets and things like that, on the nature of the earth, again, he has the Siddhāntic model. Brahmagupta, the great mathematician and astronomer, who wrote his book in 628. So first he criticizes in chapter 11 that there are two suns and two moons, this what is called the Jaina view. But in that chapter, much of that chapter, criticism of Vasishtha, Romaka, Srisena, Lata, Vishnuchandra, Pradyumna, Simha, Vijayanandin, most of their works are not available, apart from Āryabhaṭa. But most of the inconsistencies he's talking are they are using different set of rotations, planetary parameters and etc. He's not talking of cosmological differences. And he says these different parameters do not give us drishti ganitaikyam, that whatever Āryabhaṭa has used, whatever Srisena has used, etc., are not agreeing with observation. But then in chapter 21 in Goladhyaya, Brahmagupta does consider some of the issues of cosmology. And this has a commentary by Prithudaka. And the main thing is, in the beginning of the commentary itself, Prithudaka says, there are various issues which will be sort of contradicted or corrected by the treatment given in Goladhyaya. Dura vipratipanna bhuvana kosha vido anyatha sarmaveva vyavarnayanti. People who do not understand the true nature of the earth, they explain everything by different ways. Bhumeha mahapramanatvam darpanodarakāratānca kathayanti meroscha mahapramanatvam shavākāratānca tat prishthāsakto dhruvashcha grahanakṣatrāni ca avalambamānāni meror adhobhāge asmābhi uparisthitāni vanca upalabdhāni. All these kind of things they will say. Acharyena uktam, this ityādina nikaranam iti, all these can be denied by studying the Gola. Acharyena uktam tad vijnanam golat iti. Then he also says there will be some issues where there will be problems. Don't get confused by the fact that I am called Prithudaka. He is called Chaturvedas Prithudaka Swamin. So he says, this is in the next one, is it? Okay. Oh, he also says what Bhaskara had said in his commentary, that just as in Vyakarana, Prakriti, Pratyaya, Agama, Lopa, Varna, Vikara, all these are used to derive the words which are valid. In the same way, in astronomy also, we use sign, dhanu, shara, bhuja, koti, karna, and all other circles which come, which are part of geometry, asatya purvakaihi satyam grahabhramana dharitri samsthanadikam golathatvam pratipadyate. That is, these are induced by us into the world. We cannot assert that they are actually there in the world. Using all these, we are going to see what we actually observe in the world. So this is a common theme that runs through different commentators. So in the, again in the Goladhyaya, in the beginning itself, the top, in the Meru there are the Devas, and in the bottom there are Daityas, and what is up to them, down to the others. The Meru is not 84,000 yojana. So this is again contrary to what generally is said in Puranas. And then he will go, na asmakam pramana bhage pravinyam yato vayyakarnanam karmadharaya samasaudoharini bhutam vayam chaturvedatvat. Though I am a Chaturvedacharya, I am not an expert in all this. Kevalam Jyotiḥśāstra drishtya parikshadvam yuktimat ayuktimat vyakhyatam arya. Meaning I am going truly by astronomical. The cause of eclipses, I mean Brahmagupta discusses all the other things in the same way as Āryabhaṭa. Only one thing is the issue is the cause of eclipses. So Brahmagupta first discusses what is the Siddhāntic, standard Siddhāntic view, that eclipses are caused by Earth's shadow and the moon. And then he gives the reason for it, that you cannot think of Rahu doing all this. And those reasons he writes. After having said that, he says these reasons are all given by Āryabhaṭa and Varahamihira, but they are both Loka Viruddha and Smriti Viruddha. That this is contrary to what people all in widely believe, and this is also contrary to what is given in Shruti. He quotes the Svarbhanu Sukta and all that. And therefore ultimately he concludes by giving an argument that Rahu can be of the same size as the Earth's shadow, and Rahu can be as same size as the moon at the appropriate time. And therefore, at the time when the eclipse occurs, it's actually Rahu who comes and stands along with the Earth's shadow and causes the eclipse. Now we come to a very interesting text called Paitamaha Siddhanta. How much more time I have? Huh? Okay. Now this Paitamaha Siddhanta, Pingree says this was the source of all Indian astronomy, in the sense that he puts this Paitamaha Siddhanta as given in Vishnudharmottara Purana. This is generally dated to be around 550 or whatever by scholars before Pingree got into the game. But Pingree says this is around 450 of the Common Era, and all the Greco-Babylonian astronomy got into this. And it is through this, later on Āryabhaṭa did the sign table, and through this Brahmagupta did the Brahmasputa Siddhanta. That is the view he started with. And he talks of only earlier texts are Vedanga Jyotisha and Yavana Jataka. Now, I am not going into details of Paitamaha Siddhanta. The second Kanda of Paitamaha Siddhanta, the chapters 166 to 174, have a description of the cosmology and the Siddhāntic astronomy. It has everything in the way, more or less as given in Brahmagupta's Brahmasputa Siddhanta with the same parameters. It has also the method of calculating signs, which is similar to what is stated using the second order differences by Āryabhaṭa and Siddhanta. But what I don't see any scholar mentioning is the fact that right at the beginning of this Vishnudharmottara Purana, the first Kanda of Vishnudharmottara Purana has 8 chapters, which has the complete Purāṇic cosmology and cosmography. So this Vishnudharmottara Purana in the same text has the Siddhāntic astronomy and cosmology in the second Kanda, and in the first Kanda beginning, it has the Purāṇic astronomy and astrology in the first Kanda. Okay. Now we come to Lalla. What Lalla did was, he took up these topics in the Siddhantas as established by Āryabhaṭa and by Brahmagupta, and compared them with what was then current in 800 AD, though his time is not fully established, in other texts. And so he called he created a chapter where he is saying what is the Siddhantic view and what is the view in other texts and why Siddhantic view should be taken. So he has listed them, and these are the things, mithya jnanani. This word mithya jnana doesn't occur in the actual text. It is only in the colophons and things like that. It's not clear whether that was the word that he wanted to use. I'll show you the word he uses. Meru sambandhi mithya jnana, pitrinam chandra darshanam, grahana sambandhi mithya jnana, raveradaha chandraha iti nirupanam. So all these, the usual things which I have already said. But before that, there is a chapter called Bhuvana Kosha, where what he has done is what is called the Purāṇic cosmography or geography of the Sapta Samudras and the Sapta Dvipas with so many dimensions between them, etc. All that he has put it into the southern hemisphere and made that chapter. Whatever is there in Puranas, he has taken, put them into the southern hemisphere. This is not there in Āryabhaṭīya, this is not there in Brahmagupta, this is called the Goladhyaya of Lalla. So this is what he has done. And so he is calling Mithya Jnana. Prativadi vachamse shunvato manasi bhrantihi ivavatisthate yevam atah kuhetu madvachanani prathamam brahmimyam upapattimad agamam tato manasa sthairakaram parisputam. So then I will correct all of this. Now I jump to Siddhanta Shiromani. What Lalla had done is more or less followed in Shripati of 1050 AD, his Siddhanta Shekhara, and it's followed by Bhaskaracharya in his Siddhanta Shiromani Goladhyaya. Bhaskaracharya is very important because he is writing a wonderful detailed commentary so that you understand why he is saying whatever he is saying. There is nothing ambiguous about. So of course he starts with this very important statement, Yadyeva muchyate ganita skandhe upapattiman eva agamaha pramanam. So agama is pramana, but agama which is upapattiman, which meaning anupapattiman agamaha na pramanam. So there has to be an upapatti to go along with an agama. And he has taken Brahma. Why did I go into that? Okay. So in this discussion, there is a very famous commentary on Nrsimha Daivagyan, where he again says the same things that Bhaskara said or Tudaka Swami said. Vastu nirvikalpa asambhavat katham paraspara viruddhasya gati karana pratipadaka shastrasya pramanyam grahagati pratipadakam shastram tavat pramanam gatehe pratyakshopalabdhatvat. So like this, he goes on that we have to follow the theories which are as per observations, and that is and there can be several theories, more than one, which we can accept if all of them go along with observations. So vastu nirvikalpa asambhavat katham paraspara viruddhasya gati karana pratipadaka shastrasya pramanyam. Though actually the world is only one world that we are saying, but there are several theories about that. How we can, the motion is discussed by several Gati Pratipadaka Shastras. What is the justification? He says that is because all of them, they are all true to the extent they pratyaksha upalabdhatva, they tally with observation. So the way he has formulated it goes with a very famous philosophical work of Madhusudana Saraswati called Siddhanta Bindu. In fact, this whole thing is being taken almost. I am just trying to tell you how the Indian philosophical systems and our scientific systems sort of interacted. Madhusudana Saraswati is one of the most famous philosophers in the Advaita tradition in the 16th century. Nanu vastuni vikalpa sambhavat katham paraspara viruddhamata praman. And he is talking about that in the context of different theories about Jiva and Brahma. Now, Āryabhaṭīya has also this very famous statement about Upapatti. Upapatti is not to prove the ultimate truth of a proposition, but it is to justify what you have said in a community of scholars, and it is also to clear whatever doubts that you get. Now, Siddhanta Shiromani Bhaskaracharya also has a very similar structure as Lalla. He does all these sort of nirakarana of whatever he doesn't agree with. Bhumoho svashakti kalpanam. Bhuvishaye Bauddhadi yuktihi, Bauddha yukti bhangam, Jaina yukti bhangam, Bhumehe samatayaha nirakaranam. Earth is not flat. Pratyaksha virodhyashankya parihara. He even says, but we see Earth to be flat, so why is that so? So like that, all this. Svok tasya bhu paridhi pramanasya upapati, the size of the earth that he is giving, how he is going to prove. Then he goes to another portion of that, some 40 verses, 17 to 43. These deal with topics starting from Bhugole Puranivesha to Loka Vyavastha. And there he says, Yadida Muktam Tatsarvam Purāṇashritam. So this is similar to Lalla's that chapter on Saptadvipa, Saptasamudra, etc., etc. I think we will skip these things. We will go straight away now to Kerala astronomers. Goladipika is a very important different class of text. This was written by Parameshwara, the Paramaguru of Nīlakaṇṭha Somayājī. Parameshwara wrote two Goladipikas, one with 302, another with 267 verses. So this deals only with this shape of the earth, the nature of the earth, various continents on the earth, how is earth amongst the various planets, what are the orbits of the planets, and to some extent with the basics of Triprashna kind of thing. And later on, many such Gola texts are written. There are many texts written in the Madhva tradition, Gola Prabandhas are written. But this is one of the earlier ones. Written, the second one is written around 1443. And now he goes through the usual things and usual arguments that are there in Bhaskaracharya. There's something new he is saying. Wherever he wants to talk of others who are not astronomers, astronomers are referred to as Ganakas. And wherever, this is the term which Hayashi is using for his email address nowadays. So wherever the terms which occur which are not for astronomers, he calls them Kechit, Anye, Eke, etc. But when he is talking about Purāṇikas or scholars, sometimes he calls Purāṇika, sometimes he calls Vidusha, then he is more careful. And so, for instance, Saptadvipa Samudraha Purvata Dvigunaha Kramaditi Yaduktam Tacha Upasana Vishayam Ganakaihi Iti Kalpyate Na Drishti Samam. That is not as we observe, but that is a matter of Upasana. Similarly, so he is saying Natu Yukti Siddha Tata Pratipatyaha Adrishtam Phalam Bhavati. By thinking about the world that way, you will get Adrishta Phala. That is Upasana Vishaya. And similarly, Upapatya Hinoktihi Vidusham Sarvapi Upasanartha Syat. So this is a way he is trying to explain all those aspects of Purāṇic statements. Now we come to Nīlakaṇṭha Somayājī. Please give me 10 minutes, I will say about, because this is the most important thing I will have to. So who is Nīlakaṇṭha Somayājī? So he has given a detailed colophon. He is a Bhatta, he is Garga Gotra Ashwalayana, and he is the disciple of Shvetharanyanath Parameshwara, that is Vadakunathan in Trichur. Then Jataveda Putra, Shankara Agraja, Jataveda Matula, Drigganita Nirmapaka, Parameshwara Putra, Shri Damodaratta Jyotiḥśāstra. So he has learnt astronomy from Damodara, the son of the famous Parameshwara, the author of Drigganita. Ravita Atta Vedanta Shastrena. So he has learnt Vedanta from Ravita. But he is a Bhatta. He is also a Mimamsaka of the Kumarila tradition. And then he is all this. Soma Sutta Virijita Vividha Ganita Granthena, Drishta Bahupattina, Sthapita Paramarthena, Srimad Āryabhaṭīyabhāṣya Viridhati Siddhānta Vyākhyāne, Mahabhāṣye, Yukti Pratipadana Pare, Tyakta Anyatha Pratipattau, Nirasta Durvyākya Prapancha, etc., etc. This will be interesting for you to read otherwise. Okay. Now, first thing that we should know about Nīlakaṇṭha is he proposed a different model for the motion of planets. The most crucial thing about that was the Buddha and Shukra go around the sun and their orbits do not include the earth. This is the crucial difference between what is called heliocentric planetary motion and geocentric planetary motion. The planets Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, their orbits are outside of the orbit of the earth. So they go around both the sun and the earth. Whereas Venus and Mercury, their orbit is inside the orbit of the earth. They only go around the sun. Earth is not included in their orbit. So in Āryabhaṭīyabhāṣya, this gives the most succinct description and justification. But even that we cannot discuss here. We will have little time. But this is a very simple, where he is saying Mercury is going around, is going up and down with respect to the ecliptic once in 88 days. That it is latitudinal period is 88 days. But it is seen to go around all the stars once in 365 days. That is, its longitudinal period is 365 days. So what is this? And then he says this is because their orbit encircles only the sun, and they are carried around the earth by the sun. And this is all the crucial heliocentric model of planetary astronomy, which is expressed without going into the fact that the earth ought to move around the sun because the sun is the center of the universe, or the sun ought to move around the earth because earth is, there is no such argument at all. This is all as we see, as we understand, as the astronomical theories say. And this he has explained much more detail in what is called Grahasputanaine Vikshepa Vasana. So these are the three statements. Tayoho, that is Buddha Shukra, Brahmana Vrittena, na bhuhu kabli kriyate. By their orbits, earth is not encompassed. Tato bahireva sada bhuhu. Then Nīlakaṇṭha Somayājī wrote a work called Jyotiḥśāstra, the discussion of the epistemology of Jyotiḥśāstra. And that's a very important text. I'll just summarize in 2-3 sentences. So in this passage, only portion of this text has been available, published by K.V. Sharma. So in this text he says, we used Āryabhaṭa's book, we used those parameters, tried to calculate 2 grahanas, and it did not agree with observation. How is this possible? You say Āryabhaṭa is tapobhi prasanno brahma Āryabhaṭāya bhagana paridhyārikam grahaganana sadhanabhutam sankhya vishesham upadishesha. Āryabhaṭa did tapas and Brahma told him the true parameters of planetary motion. How is this possible? Iti kechit manyate. Therefore, how can you question what Āryabhaṭa has written? Tasya kutah parikshanam brahmanaha sarvajñātvat ragadveshariyabhāvācha avitathatva nischayat iti chet manda. This is, you have not understood science, you have not understood the world. Maivam, Devata Prasado Mati Vaibalya Itureva, that he did tapas to get the clarity of intellect which enabled him to see Sadasat Samudrata, that will come. Nacha Punaha Brahma Adityova Swayameva Agatya Upadisha, that I don't know whether that's true or not. But Devata Prasado Mati Vaibalya Itureva is one of the most important statements we have to. This is at a time, or 50 years later, we see scientists in Europe saying, we have discovered the true laws by which God has created the universe. We have understood the mind of the divinity. What we will say, Parma Yogi Vang Manisa Aparichedya Swarupa Svabhava, or Yato Vacho Nivartante Aprapya Manatha Saha. The claim at the origin of modern science was, we have discovered the way God has created those ultimate laws. We have discovered. That is what Newton wrote, that is what Kepler wrote, that is what Descartes wrote. Okay, another thing, important thing is that these Pancha Siddhantas were all right at their time, but today they are not all right. But that is because things do change for whatever reason. But today you have to observe and find out the Siddhanta that is appropriate, which agrees, and that is the most important job. And so when you teach a student, don't teach him as if the theory is the finished product. You teach him also the method to check the theory, to method to improve the theory. So this pariksha is to be taught to the student. That is the most important thing. And he thinks Āryabhaṭīya is most important because it teaches pariksha. And then he quotes the Taittiriya Aranyaka for the sources of pramana, Smriti Pratyaksham Aitikyam Anumanam Chatushtayam, Etaihi Aditya Mandalam. So all this is there. Earlier I think he has quoted, I think it is here, Jyotiḥśāstrepi Dvarena Chandraditya Gati, here this Tantravartika he has quoted, Tithi Nakshatra Jnanam Avichinna Sampradaya Ganita Anumana Moolam. So he is very well versed in all systems of Indian philosophy. Now coming to what is his view on cosmology. Main thing he is saying is, as regards the orbits of the planets and the shape and nature of Earth, etc., the instruction of Jyotiḥśāstra, which are supported by various pramana, are to be followed, in preference to statements on such topics found in the Purāṇas, which are meant for some other purpose and are only in the form of Arthavada and do not convey any import by themselves on these issues. Tatra Swarte Tatparya Bhavat. So he is taking this Kalakriya Pada 15. Before that, he also quotes this dictum of Bhattacharya on Upadaya, PA, etc. So now, Yatha Bhaganadi Sankhyasu, Manvantara Yuga Parimane, na Vipratipatihi. Between different Siddhantas, though they give different numbers, there is really no difference. This is what he is arguing, many of them. Between Āryabhaṭas, Ardharatrika and Audaika, there is really no difference. न तथा कक्षक्रमादौ भूम्याद्याकार स्वभावयोश्च ज्योतिषशास्त्रकर्तॄणां विप्रतिपत्ति. So similarly, in all this, there is no great difference. पुराणेष्वेव हि तत्र परस्परं विप्रतिपत्तिः इति अभिप्रेत्य आह श्रीपतिः. So he is quoting this fact that Earth is at the center of the world and it is spherical and all that from Shripati. Jyotiḥśāsya pratipadya bhuparimāṇākārādehe. So what Jyotiḥśāstra is giving about bhuparimāṇa, akara, etc. Pratyaksha anumana arthāpatyādi pramāna mūlatvat. Purāṇānām tat pradaršanasya anyaparatvat arthavadatvat tatra tātparyābhāvācca ayam pakṣayeva sadhiyān. And then he quotes Shripati about. So his argument is that Puranas are, their purpose is something else. Tat pradaršanasya anyaparatvat, and they are arthavada, and there is no tātparya for them of their own sentences. I will explain what these are. But before that, let me just go to another quotation of Nīlakaṇṭha Somayājī. Again, he is saying Tacha Arthavada Siddham on another issue, that Earth is spherical. Then here also, Tasmat Anuvada eva Anyatha Anupapati Siddhasya Golakarattvasya Shrutau Bhuchandra Bimbayoh. So, as regards Earth and Moon, if Shruti and other texts talk of Golakaratva, that should be taken only as Anuvada. I will tell you what is Anuvada. Itaresham Parimandalatvasya Shruyamanasya Pramāṇāntara Virodha Bhavat Bhūtārtavādatvam. In some other issues about the sphericity of some other distant bodies, stars, etc., we have no other pramana. So that should be taken as a Bhūtārtavada. What is given in Smriti and other Smritis, not what is given in Jyotiḥśāstra text. And finally, Yat Punaha Bhumandalasya Mahaparimanatvam Saptadiva Saptasamudradimatvam Akarantarani Merorapi Mahaparimanatvam Yetesham Smaryamananam Shruyamananam, that is what is given in Shruti and Smriti, Gunavadatvam, where they contradict what is given in Jyotiḥśāstra, that would be taken as Gunavada. Arthavadatmakatvat Tesham Vidhi Visheshatvat Swarthe Tātparyābhāvat. For they are mainly meant to follow the vidhi that is given in this. I will finish in 1 minute. Vidhi that is given in both those Shruti and Smriti. And so Swarthe Tātparya, their own meaning, they are not conveying. Teshamapi Pramāṇānantara Virodhādeva Gunavadatvam Nirniyate Ityetad Aupanishadamapi Matameva. Even the Vedantins agree with this. Yataha tattaihi arthavadasya traividyam angikriyate virodha gunavadasyat anuvado avadharite bhutartavadaha tadhanat arthavadaha. There are 3 types. This goes back to Sureshwaracharya's Vartika on Brihadaranya Upanishad Bhashya of Shankaracharya. So what is this arthavada? So this developed in the Mīmāmsa Shastra, Jaimini Sutras and its Shabara Bhashya. This arthavada concept came in. It was further elaborated by the Bhattas and various other philosophers of Mīmāmsa school. It has also been discussed by Shankara Bhagavatpada and other scholars in Vedanta, such as Sureshwara, Vidyaranya, Madhusudan Saraswati, and I am sure scholars here will know. I have looked up this subject only in the last 3-4 weeks. So, these 3 types of Arthavada, one is called Gunavada. Now, what is Arthavada? Tasya cha lakshanaya prayojanavat Artha Paryavasanatvam Tathahi Arthavada Vakyam hi Swartha Pratipadane Prayojana Abhavat Vidhi Nishedhayoho Prashasya Nindikatve Lakshanaya Pratipadeti. So Vedic statements of various types, Vidhi, Mantra, Namadheya, Nishedha, Arthavada. Vidhi is the main part, Mantra is used in Yajnas, Namadheya, Nishedha. Arthavadas are in the nature of eulogy or decrying something. And that eulogy or decrying is a part of a particular vidhi, that is to make you do. And for that, these arthavadas come. They are meaningful only through lakshana. They are not meaningful through abhida shakti. The words as they mean, that meaning is not to be taken. The figurative meaning or the lakshana meaning, this is in the Alankara Shastra, this what is called lakshana meaning. So they are meaningful only in the through the lakshana, And that way they add to the vidhi. So they are important. So swadhyayo adhyatavya, you have to recite and use all the Vedic mantras, though a large number of them will turn out to be Arthavadas as per this Mimamsa analysis. Anyway, so this example given is Adityo Yupaha. So the Yupa, the Yajna, that row, what is that stump, that pillar. Aditya, it is shining like the sun. Obviously it's not Aditya. So this is Gunavada, because the words themselves, they give a contradictory meaning here. And something like Agnihi Himasya Bheshajam, if you have Hima, then you apply heat, that will go. So this everybody knows otherwise by experience. So you don't need the Shruti Vakya as a pramana for this. So this is only what is called the Anuvada. Then Indra Vritya Vajram Udayacha. So Indra picked up this Vajra against Vritra. There is no other pramana either way, contradicting it or supporting it. This is what is called Bhutarthavada. So what Nīlakaṇṭha is saying is, he took up the Siddhāntic astronomic view, and he took up the Purāṇic and the Shruti view, and he tried to say that in Shruti, wherever you go through whatever has been found by your own pramanas of the Jyotiḥśāstra, in trying to understand the position, the shape, the nature, the movement of the stars and planets and the earth. So whatever is given in Shruti and Purana, you don't need to decry them. They are a part of a certain vidhi that is there in Shruti, or they are a part of a certain upasana that is part of the Puranas, and there they have a meaning only not by their own words. They have a meaning as a lakshana, figurative meaning only to induce you to do all this. And therefore, you need not worry about that. Of course, the philosophers, Madhusudan Saraswati, etc., in their tradition, they have a different view that this Bhutarthavada can still be taken, about which there is no other pramana decrying it or accepting it, because most of the Uttaramimamsa position is Brahman is established only Shastra Yonitvat. There is no other pramana for Brahman, and therefore this Bhutarthavada is to be taken as a pramana, that should not be taken as Arthavada. Anyway, so this was the tradition which came up to Nīlakaṇṭha, which analyzed the other contradictions in other traditions. Maybe what is given in Puranas go back to 5,000-6,000 years, we don't know. But most of the modern scholars put all the Puranas around the same time, between 4th century to 6th century or 8th century. And Siddhāntic astronomy, according to modern scholars, was also during the same period. The earlier Siddhantas did not refer to Puranas by name, Āryabhaṭa or Brahmagupta and their Bhaskara. From even Lalla, I don't know whether he referred to Purana, but from Shripati, Bhaskara onwards, Puranas are referred to, and certain contradictions with astronomy are decried. They are said to be unreasonable, and they are therefore. But they do not talk about the rest of Purana, what is this thing. This much they say that they are not. But they also adopt a portion of Purana for their Bhuvana Kosha portion. This is what a lot of Western scholars have found very objectionable, and they have put all of them in the southern hemisphere, in which we were not familiar at that time. But when it comes to the Kerala astronomers, they have even advanced the whole thing. They have used all the traditional epistemological apparatus, Nyaya, Mimamsa, and tried to understand. And the Shrutis themselves in India are not like sacred scriptures of the rest of traditions. There are so many interpretations of them, so many arguments on them. So they are not above argument, above sort of understanding them in various levels and ways. And Shruti in relation to astronomy, it is astronomy which is relevant for understanding what is done as per the methodology, accepted methodology of astronomy. And other Shruti Vakyas which are not contradicted, you can understand them. And Shruti, they are not saying Shruti is irrelevant. It is relevant for all those things, for all those vidhi, for all those upasana. That is very relevant. And whatever their injunctions on how we have to live in an eco-friendly way with the world, they are all as relevant as they would be. But they may not be relevant for understanding the shape of the earth in relation to what is given in astronomical texts. If there is nothing in astronomical texts, of course, we accept all of them. And sorry, I have taken much more time than I ought to have. Thank you very much. One or two brief questions you allow, please, madam. Sir.
Is there any such Shruti that you have?
No, Purāṇa will have. Bhagavata has Bhugola.
No, that is okay, but Shrutavu...
That I don't know. I am not aware.
Okay.
You have to ask Professor Iyengar or other knowledgeable. Bhagavata, there are 4 or 5 places. Bhugola appears. Bhumandala also appears. There is one scholar called, again, I'm talking of these Western scholars, Toke Knudsen, who has written a paper about 1 year ago, where he has tried to analyze the Bhagavata commentaries. And there he tries to find that in the commentary, they are explaining Bhugola not as a sphere, but as a Vrittakara Bhumandala in the Bhagavata tradition. But these astronomers of 16th century like Jñānarāja used this word Bhugola as an example to show that there is a smriti outside of Jyotiḥśāstra also, like Purāṇas, which talk of Bhugola. Shruti, I don't know, sir, whether there is. But I think you will have to clarify the meaning of some of these concepts, because I have only, as a very outsider into this subject, I have sort of said what. Yes.
Is there any mention in the Siddhāntas of that the stars, the nakshatras, the stars, they are similar to the sun, so they are other suns in other words, or mention that there are other worlds outside the planetary system?
In the kind of Siddhāntas I have seen, that kind of issue perhaps is not discussed, but it will be there in some commentaries or the others, I don't know. About star similarity to the sun, maybe the pre-Siddhāntic works will have something. The Siddhāntic works are very tightly structured around this, how to calculate the time, direction, space, and for that they have a cosmological and a cosmographical model which will suit them. So all those other issues are rather incidental in the kind of older Siddhāntic traditions. So they may not be talking much about that. But the pre-Siddhāntic tradition would have talked about it. Scholars of that may tell us.
मम एकः प्रश्नः अस्ति तत्र एका संज्ञा अस्ति कालः इति अन्या च समयः इति तत्र उभयोः कः भेदः अस्ति किं लक्षणं कुत्रापि दत्तमस्ति वा न वा अत्र भवतां संस्कृते वैदुष्यं दृष्ट्वा मया धाष्टं कृतं यत् संस्कृतेनैव प्रक्षामि
मम एतद् ज्ञातं नास्ति काल and samaya. She is asking what is their difference. Really, I am not. I am not studied this, or I have not read something. If I had read something on that also, because I am not a Sanskrit scholar anyway, all this is secondary knowledge. But on this, I really don't know. I have not read.
No, I just wanted to point out, since this is a general conference where modern scholars have assembled, in all the Siddhāntic astronomers, when they talk about Purāṇas, they simply say Purāṇika. Which Purāṇa they don't say. They would have known 18 Purāṇas or whatever, they don't refer to anything. And even the modern scholars, like Pingree or Plofker, they simply say Purāṇika, Purāṇika, Purāṇa. Which Purāṇa says, there will be some which says that sun is below Chandra. But not all Purāṇas. For example, Brahmanda Purāṇa says, is only, that shloka I was just now pointing out to Sudarshan, Dakshinayana Margasto Yada Charati Rashmivan Tada Sarva Grahanancha Suryo Adaha Prasarpati. Only when he is in the Dakshinayana Marga, when it is the winter solstice point, Surya is below all other objects is what it says. So this Ucha Nicha was a technical word, perhaps measured from the pole star. Whereas Brahmanda Purāṇa has the concept of Shishumara and Dhruva also, in some ancient time. Whereas the other Puranas, they attach the meaning of Ucha and Nicha not as azimuth. Modern way, if I see it, this Ucha and Nicha is an azimuth point, because azimuth is going to be, say, suppose from Kurukshetra in the northern hemisphere, winter solstice will go 110 degrees, whereas all other objects will be at some other azimuth. So they might have thought it like that. So to combine all of this into one basket and then say, the later Puranas might have omitted this shloka, because Brahmanda Purana is the shortest and it seems to be nearest to the Vedas, whereas the others are not so, the fidelity is not maintained. So I appeal to the modern astronomers who are working on this critical analysis of history of astronomy in India to specify the Purana, because there is no single critical edition of a Purana. Not for any Purana I know there is a critical edition. For Vishnu Purana there is a critical edition produced from the Baroda, but that again contains a lot of wrong information when it comes to numbers. And hence it is an appeal I like to make here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There's no comment on what you have said, it's perfectly valid. When modern scholars, the ones I quoted, they are putting Puranas together. Pingree has a version where he thinks what Kirfel analyzed in 1920s or 1930s. And the search then was something called the Ur Purana, the original Purana from which everything comes. So he has summarized what Kirfel has said. And if you see that paper, he has even referred to Dhruva in the Shishumara constellation in that thing. Kirfel has referred, which Pingree has referred again. So this is called Ur Purana. For him, there is no other Purana. And Pingree even refused to see that this Paitama Siddhanta, which he found in Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, and which he thought was the vehicle through which Greco-Babylonian astronomy came to India. He even refused to see that the first half of that Vishnu Dharmottara Purana had a complete Purāṇic version of cosmology and cosmography. So they are not going to do any of these things. If these things have to be done, Indian scholars who have much more greater understanding and faith in these scriptures, they think of us as being bound to these scriptures. We don't seem to be bound to anything at all, at least modern Indians. So if we could use all our critical scholarship in producing critical editions of Puranas analysis, and they have been analyzed by all those Virodha Parihara people in a very difficult time, in the time of Mughal rule and British rule. They were only replying to critiques. They were really not looking into, they didn't know what Nīlakaṇṭha had said or what original versions of what most people had said. That was a difficult time of Sanskrit scholarship in India. Today, it's not a difficult time, but it's a time when we have ignored Sanskrit scholarship. If we could take it seriously, modern scholars as well as traditional scholars, I'm sure we will be able to write much more meaningful versions of our ancient astronomical tradition in the Purāṇic and the Vedic corpus also. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Srinivas-ji, for sharing the historian perspective of cosmology and cosmography. We loved that you gave a very detailed understanding on the Indian epistemology, the Anuman, Shabda and Pratyaksha, also giving the hierarchy of the same, the research principle of validation, Pariksha, Arthavad and Eology. We appreciate the whole historiographical presentation based upon the arguments and evidences given by Āryabhaṭīya, Brahmagupta-ji, Lallacharya-ji, Bhaskaracharya-ji, Narasimha Acharya, Parameswar, Nīlakaṇṭha Somayājī. So what was amusing most to me was the word Vidusha used for scholars. So that was something which was amazing for me.